Welcome to Unleashed, the podcast where we redefine leadership by focusing on what truly matters, the people driving change. Change leadership is about guiding people through transformation in a way that inspires them to embrace change because they believe in it. Whether you're a leader looking to foster a culture of growth or someone eager to break through barriers in life and business, this podcast is for you. Now our host, Wendy.
Welcome to Unleashed. I'm Wendy, and I'm your host. Today, our guest is Kyle McDowell, a former Fortune 10 executive turned best-selling author, leadership coach, and inspirational speaker. Kyle is clearly on a mission to crush corporate dysfunction and reignite leaders' passion. With nearly 3 decades of experience leading tens of thousands, his game-changing philosophy, the 10 W's, transforms toxic workplace cultures into thriving, high-performance environments. In his Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller, Begin with We, Kyle lays out a bold framework for leadership that prioritizes collaboration, accountability, and excellence. Because the future of business depends on leaders who we put we before me. Kyle's insights have earned him invitations to speak at prestigious business, educational, and nonprofit institutions. His expertise has been featured in major national publications, including Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Inc. magazine. Kyle, I could go on and on and on, and I am just so excited about the show today. So thank you so much for being a guest.
No, thank you, Wendy. I think you're doing such important work, and to be able to share my message and spend some time together, it's a real privilege. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, time is precious. So let's get going here. I really want our listeners to hear a little bit about, you've spent 3 decades climbing the corporate ladder and, you became a Fortune 10 executive. Was that always your goal?
It was actually. So growing up, I had aspirations of being a professional football player, and I also I shifted from that to I wanted to be a news personality. I wanted to be. I'm going to date myself, but I wanted to be the next Dan Rather. But I had kind of a rude awakening when I was graduating from my undergrad, and I had a mass communications undergrad major. I wanted to go do the news, but the rude awakening was I would have had to have taken a pay cut from what I was making part-time at the regional bank that I was employed within, which was kind of you go to school for 4 years and you're like, all right, I'm going to set out on this path to do exactly what I want. I'm passionate about doing this. But then I realized I got some bills I got to take care of, and I got some student loan stuff I got to take care of. But I'd already spent 4 years inside of this bank, inside of their customer service engine, and I found a knack. I felt like I was adding value. I had gotten a couple of promotions during that time, so I felt like, well, maybe I'll try this corporate thing. And like I would guess so many of your listeners, you blink and 30 years have gone by.
That's right.
And, a career has been made. Now, you were very kind in reading some, accolades or things that, kind of resume type stuff. But I think what's missing when we talk about the high points of our career is, and we don't often talk about it, are the low points. And for me, Wendy, I would say, and again, I also think this is probably familiar for many members of your audience, is with each step of growth, bigger role, bigger responsibility, bigger compensation, cool corner offices, those types of things. The only thing that matched that for me was the level of apathy I was feeling, which is a real hard pill to swallow, my friend, because, I looked around at these environments that I was largely responsible for creating, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I lacked the energy and the optimism and the passion that I entered the workforce with so many years ago. And it was probably 20 years into my career. I knew I had to make a change. And that's, I guess, ultimately what brings us here together is the decision I made and the changes that I made.
Yeah. Well, and before we hit record, one of the things that you said is, it took you 50 years to actually get here and figure out what you really want to do when you grow up. And I don't know that we'll ever grow up, but when you look at your leadership journey, was there a defining moment, Kyle, that just made you walk away and start your mission for, not just leading, but actually transforming leaders?
Oh, what a great question. And I'd like to think there are many moments that kind of shape who we are and where we end up. But for me, there was a real pivotal moment. So this level of apathy that I mentioned a moment ago, it became such a force in my life that I had to start some self-reflection and asking questions that were kind of uncomfortable to ask and really uncomfortable to answer because I had reached a point probably 20 years into my career where those that I thought had a lot of respect for me, they actually feared me. And just for some context, my leadership style, I was a product of the environment in which I was raised. I would bang the fist on the desk, bark orders,
Really?
command and control was really kind of how I led, and I should say managed, not led.
Mm.
And with that became this like disconnected feeling that I just that apathy resulted in one question ringing so loudly in my mind, and it was, is there a better way? I was on the doorstep of a divorce, which ultimately happened. My
Mm.
health was really not in a great place, and I made this decision to step away from the corporate world. Now, I must say, man, I'm not naive. Like I'm a very lucky guy. I was in a position that would allow me to step away for an unknown period of time to kind of figure out what it is that I wanted to do when I grew
Mhm.
up. And I do believe all things happen for a reason. So I was
Mhm.
away, I stepped away, and within 2 weeks, 10 days or 11 days or something, I got a phone call asking would I be interested in talking about a position that would require me to lead about 15,000 people. It was a $7 billion portfolio.
Oh, is that all? Okay.
That's all.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, really massive organization. And at first I was like, I don't think this is for me. But I'm open to all things. So started the interview process, went through several interviews, and I realized throughout that process, the opportunity in front of me represented what I was chasing. It was an opportunity to transform an organization and lead in a way that I had never been led. It was clear to
Mm.
me that the hiring manager, the fellow who would ultimately make the decision to bring me on or not, he wasn't checked out, but he wasn't nearly as engaged as one might expect for a portfolio so large. But I read that as, okay, this is your chance, dude. If you want to lead in a way that you've never led, be the leader you've never had, this
Mm.
is your chance. So I accepted the role, and the pivotal moment that really changed everything for me was about 60 days into that role. I knew that I had to leave. I had to enter this team with a different approach than I had in years past because I knew the recipe for the previous 20 years to get great results, but I lacked fulfillment and I lacked true connection with those that I
Mm.
led, the members of my team. And about 60 days into this new role, I brought the top 40 or 50 leaders of my newly inherited organization into a location in Lawrence, Kansas. And I remember it like it was yesterday, Wendy. The night before, I knew I had to give a talk the next morning. I was terrified because if I knew exactly what I would have said, several years prior, but this was my chance to kind of set off on a new course. And my approach to that evening to create the slides that I would share the next day was something like this. It was like, what are the things, the interactions, the relationships or lack of that you had with your leader or boss that made me feel the way that I had felt before I exited, the apathy? And what can I do to not kind of push that feeling onto others? But also, I knew I had to be really clear in the expectations, our expectations for one another. So
Mhm.
that evening, I had my laptop in my lap. I was still wearing that day's suit. It's probably around midnight before I started this presentation, creating the presentation. And a couple hours later, I had 10 sentences in front of me. That's it. They each began and still do begin with the word we.
Mm.
And they were kind of, I didn't really know what to call them. I called them the 10 We's because I'm not super creative on that type of stuff. So, right, really creative. So the next morning, I stepped out in front of that group and I shared with them these 10 sentences, these 10 principles. And I said, guys, look, you don't have to adopt these principles. I want you to know this is what you can expect from me. If you do adopt these principles and you can find a place for them inside of your organization, the teams that you lead, I would be grateful. But more important than anything else, these are my expectations for how we treat each other.
Mm.
First, I really wasn't super passionate about how we approached and treated our clients because I felt, and I still feel this way, if we're high functioning behind the scenes, we're much better positioned to deliver excellence to those we serve. So I wanted to start behind the curtain, and man, Wendy, what happened over the course of the next couple of years was profound. Not only did the organization transform in ways that I don't think many of us thought possible, but more kind of profound to me was watching bosses transform into managers and then ultimately transform into leaders.
Mm.
And I will end with this, man. I was in that role for a few years, created these principles, watched them flower. And I haven't worked for that firm in 7 years. I still have one-on-ones with a small group of people from that team.
You
And I haven't worked
do?
with them in forever. So you talk about a connection and having a lasting
Mm.
impact and creating a leadership legacy, all things
Yeah.
that I could care less about until the last decade or so. I think that's a strong commentary for having a connection with folks that lasts far beyond the tenure of any role that you've ever had. And
Yeah.
been the beautiful kind of byproduct of this is those connections that I've made.
Yeah. Well, and is that really, you've mentioned a couple of times management versus leadership, and I think that's always such an interesting question. When I'm doing leadership workshops, that's one of the questions that I have them define is what is
Oh yeah.
management and what is leadership? And people really struggle with answering that question.
Yep.
And I think a lot of it is because they have not had great leaders.
Right.
And so,
That's right.
as I think about that, I look at my upbringing, if you will, in the professional world. And, I started at 16 years old in retail. And, I chose a store that I really love to work in or that I love to shop in. I wanted an employee discount. So I'm like, shoot, I'll just work there. And, by the time I was graduating from high school, the assistant manager had left. I was a top salesperson and they offered me the assistant manager role because I was the top salesperson. And I think we all know that the top salesperson is usually not the best manager.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
I became what a good friend of mine, Brian Yeager, calls a super doer. I still was the top salesperson, and yet I was doing scheduling, I was doing opening, I was, trying to train people, which I had no idea how to do. Like leadership wasn't even like that was so far away from my line of sight because I was just tired and doing everything.
Yeah.
And I don't think that experience is all that different
Not at
from a
all.
lot of our experiences that, we're promoted and how are we developed from not just doing the job, whatever the job is,
Yeah.
into this leadership role. So unpack this whole management versus leadership for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So by the way, couldn't agree more. And I see it all the time now in my work, and that is organizations, I think for the most part, are pretty good at training employees on how to do their job, the
Yep.
policies and procedures, like the
Yep.
nuts and bolts, the execution stuff.
The job description role.
Well said. Yes,
Yeah.
perfect. But where so many fall short is establishing similar kind of guide rails or requirements. Sounds a little strong, but I think it's appropriate for behavior. The
Mm.
expectations that we have of one another, how we are supposed to interact with one another, the commitments that we make and keep to one another. And that's kind of where I took the 10 We's and ultimately the book is you can train anyone to do just about anything, in my opinion. That's management, right? Making
Mm.
sure the boxes are checked, making sure we're managing to our KPIs. Actually, I'll take it a step further. A boss. I'll start with a boss. That's what you were when you were first promoted into that assistant
Yep.
position. Likewise, I was a boss, and that meant really checking boxes, making sure scheduling was done appropriately. The foundation or fundamental things that must happen for us to serve our clients, whether it be a product or service we deliver. I think many of us at some point in our career transition to managers. And that is when we see a little bit more of a global view of our team, right? What are we doing in the context of the bigger organization? How do we kind of change our aperture from the very fundamental tactics required to lead people, manage people is probably more appropriate. And we step up a bit. But when we transition from manager to leader, now we care about the humans that are in our orbit. We care about, picking them up to be better than they were yesterday. We care about leaving them in a place, not just the team around us, but the organization as a whole, leaving it in a better place than we found it. Again, that's the leadership legacy. But without a conspicuous focus on making those shifts from boss to manager to leader, it never happens. And I can speak for myself on that front because I, as I mentioned, was just so disconnected from all the dysfunction and toxicity I'd seen for so many years that I started to accept it and worse, perpetuate it until I had
Mm.
this really, really profound experience of meeting someone. Harry Kramer is a man that I look up to in more ways than one. He's a mentor. He's a friend. He's a former CEO of a multi-billion-dollar firm called Baxter International. He's now he speaks worldwide. He's a professor at the Kellogg School of Management, where I went to business school. Cross paths with this guy. He wrote a book called From Values to Action, and within the book, one of the four values that he evangelizes is self-reflection. And I was like, well, what place does self-reflection have in the
Mm.
workplace? But it's everything. It's everything. So I had to go deep, deep inside, look within and say, all right, man, are you the person that you're going to look back at or on many, many years from now and be proud of that? If your mother was still here and she's looking over your shoulder and how you handled a one-on-one or a team meeting or, any interaction with those that you work with, would she be proud? And that self-reflection led me down a path that was super uncomfortable, and it
Mm.
required me to make choices that I had never really been confronted with. Like, okay, you're walking into the office and you had a rough night or you've had a rough week. That doesn't matter. It really doesn't, because as a leader, you have to put some of those things aside and invest your
Mhm.
energy into those around you. Said more succinctly, it was a transition from me. The transition required me to stop focusing on the numbers and focus more on the people that are responsible for delivering the numbers. And it's a very different
Mm.
paradigm. So, you know, the most important part, I think, that I would love your listeners to walk away from this part of our conversation with is, if you want to be on this hamster wheel for 20, 30, 40 years in total, probably about 100,000 hours. That's a big ass number. On average, in the US, we spend about 100,000 hours at this thing called work.
Yeah.
And if we don't take a moment to step off that hamster wheel to kind of reset with the energy and the optimism and the desire to have an impact and find fulfillment that I think we all enter the workforce with,
Yeah.
but we lose it over time. If we don't take a moment to say, where did that person go? And what has happened from that moment when I entered the workforce with so much passion to where I am today?
Mm.
What's happened and what can I do? Is there a better way to reconnect with those emotions that I had when I first entered? And that self-reflection starts, but it never stops. It's something that has to
Mm.
be done almost daily. And I even say sometimes every interaction, because it's very easy to fall back on your business card, especially when you are facing times of adversity. It's because I said so, the way that you and I were probably taught to
That's right.
manage.
Hmm.
So the takeaway from all that for me is, you don't have to hate your job. There is a better way, but it requires making a decision, and that decision has to be made over and over and over again.
Yeah. Self-reflection, huge. I mean, everything starts with awareness. And, I think about self-reflection and then I also think about blind spots because it's
Mm.
one thing to think, I gotta hold the mirror up and I gotta really see, how am I leading? Am I leading? Am I managing? And I know one of the stories that you tell is about a woman who you realized that, and you said it earlier, my people were fearful.
Yeah.
And so you talk about a woman who, now I'm not going to give away the end of the story. I'll let you tell the story, but how did you uncover that there was fear among the people that you were working with?
You used a word a moment ago in this question that brought a smile to my face, and that's using the mirror.
Yeah.
In the book, I talk about what I call the mirror of truth. And it's really a metaphor for self-reflection, but it doesn't have to be a metaphor. It could be someone that's going to tell you like it is. And you know this, right? When you ascend inside of the corporate world, your jokes get funnier. Right. You know it.
So
People,
true.
right? People are more inclined to tell you what they think you want to hear
Yeah.
versus what you
Uh-huh.
need to hear.
Mm.
So the mirror of truth is that metaphor for taking that quiet time to reflect on who you are. Am I the person that I can be proud of and others can be proud of me? And more importantly, am I creating and leading with an example that I would be proud to see replicated?
Mm.
So that self-reflection is absolutely huge. Now, that on its own is probably not enough.
Right.
hopefully
Because we
you've
have
got
blind
folks.
spots, right?
That's where I'm going. Yep, is those blind spots. And I found, and the way I learned about this respect versus fear thing was I could not get anybody to give me a straight answer. Those that I
Wow.
thought were my confidants that I had worked with for a number of years, I, 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 I got happy talk when I asked the questions like, are we doing something here? Not just earning a paycheck, but are we having an impact? Because now I'm at a place in my life where I feel like almost everything that we do should have some type of thread about helping someone else. It's in our DNA. We're wired to
Mhm.
help one another.
That's right.
And when I realized that those that I thought respected me did not sense that from me, as if I was in a position to help them and better them and develop and help grow, and likewise them do the same for me. When I realized that wasn't happening, it just further kind of fueled my desire to find this better way. And I can say now, a decade plus later, I truly believe I have found a better way, and that's through these principles, the 10 We's.
Mm. So how did you actually like once you were self-aware and you realized that number one, this was the culture, this wasn't where you wanted it to be, what did you do? Like, how did you make those changes? Because that's not easy.
Well, for me, it was a little easier because I had this moment away from employment, frankly, where
Yeah.
I knew and I made this promise to myself. Like I wasn't independently wealthy, and I had to go back to work, but I knew it had to. I wanted it anyway to be in a scenario that would allow me to kind of pivot from my approaches of the past. When I stepped on stage that morning that I mentioned in Lawrence, Kansas, to share these principles, as I mentioned, the focus was much more about what they could expect from me. And then I quickly pivoted towards the end of that
Mm.
conversation to say, because I'm going to have these same expectations of you. But I went a little further than that. These 10 principles, they resonated with me for the previous 12 hours or so. But if I told you that we'd be talking about them uh, 8 years later, I would have laughed at you. I said, there's no chance. But when I shared them with the team, my approach was, listen, you can add an 11th we. You can subtract a couple of these. It's not going to change what you can expect from me, though. And these are the things. And what happens over time is me living them and being conspicuous about living them. For example, Wendy, one of my favorite of the 10 principles is we challenge each other. We number 8. I would conspicuously say, like, if you were in a bad way, Wendy, let's say you're on my team, right? And I've noticed that your performance has started to slide a little bit because you've been a superstar forever, and I've just noticed that there's a bit of a slide lately. Instead of walking to you and starting this conversation by, hey, let's talk about your numbers, and
Mm.
that changed to, hey, Wendy, we challenge each other, right? A term or an expression or a sentence that you've heard over and over again because I've said it over and over again.
Mhm.
And then you start to hear others on the team say it as well, even when you're not like pushing it. So I saw it start to disarm people. And more than anything, it created this common kind of alignment for us. Because remember, a principle by definition is a series of fundamental truths, our foundation for a system of beliefs. And my
Mm.
hope was if I can get this team to subscribe to this series of beliefs, our fundamental truths, we do the right thing, we lead by example, we take action, we pick each other up all the way 1 through 10. I felt like we're much more on the same sheet of music than maybe most teams. And it turns out it's true. When you can get a group to align around a series of fundamental truths, like the 10 We's, we are aligned in how we do things. We're aligned in what matters most. And when we face adversity, whether it be a competitive threat, whether it be downsizing, whatever it is, the adversity that so many of us face in the roles that we play, we now have this cultural currency. We speak the same lingo. Our vernacular is the same. We know what to expect from one another. Those times of adversity are so much easier to get through because we know where
Mm.
each other stands and we know what our fundamental truths and our system of beliefs, we know what they are.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Kyle, I love that one so much that, we challenge each other, right? That is so much better than, hey, Kyle, I have some feedback for you.
Yeah. Let's
Right.
talk about
And
your
and
numbers.
it's the same thing.
It is.
And
It
what
really
a
is.
great culture. Like, yeah, we do challenge each other. I want you to get better. I trust you that when you challenge me, it's with a heart of wanting me to get better. And that's a culture, I think, especially in today's age. People want to work for that.
Amen. Amen. Well, I mean, there is a rule, right? So we challenge each other has a rule. The challenges must be grounded in data or experience, not just your opinion, because we all have those. That's not
Right.
necessarily going to move the needle.
Yep.
So the challenges are important, but when I got to we number 8, we challenge each other. I was really clear to say, because you know this, like the challenge is almost always reserved for the boss to the team. There's
Right.
rarely, at least in my experience, I've never seen someone say, you need to challenge each other. Team members challenge each other. If this
Yep.
is a real team, and,
Yep.
and we're not a bunch of people that have the same badge that sit in the same area or have the same titles, if we're a real team, we want each other to be their best.
That's
And
right.
the leader or the boss cannot be the only person to issue those challenges. The math says that won't work. You can't be everywhere at all times. So we need people, we need our team members to care a hell of a lot about what it is that we do and challenge each other to be excellent,
That's
not
right.
perfect, but
That's
to
right.
be excellent. So that was the approach with we number 8. But I have to say, I was quick to create we number 9, which is we embrace challenge. Because if we have this
Mm.
challenge rich organization where peers are challenging peers, teams challenging the
Yeah.
leader, and the leader's challenging the more senior leader, but we're not prepared to embrace these challenges, then we've got a recipe for us. And it's without those challenges, we are staring at mediocrity.
Yeah.
And mediocrity is not fulfilling. It's not going to create something special. It's not going to have the impact that we all should strive to have. So, it's just important to remember challenge is great, but receiving those challenges is just as
Mm.
important. Otherwise, you're obstinate and we don't get any better.
Yeah, that's right. So, one of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier is adversity and leading in adversity. And, you know, we have been through this leadership evolution. It will continue to evolve. I'm so grateful that we no longer lead by title. I think we're all in agreement that there is no such thing as leadership by title. And, I look at COVID and how COVID really was this next catalyst of leadership evolution that, leaders really had to step up and they really had to change how they were leading and how they were communicating and how they were building that personal connection. And so, you talk about the fact that the corporate world is plagued with uncertainty and apathy. And I think during COVID, that's one of the times you want to talk uncertainty. I mean, I don't know that we've ever had a time where we have led in such uncertainty. So I find that it's intriguing because you make this connection between uncertainty and apathy.
Mm.
And I would think the opposite. I would think in uncertainty, leaders would step up and there would be this incredible urgency for action and to figure it out and to like that's not really what your experience has been. You see this connection between uncertainty and apathy. So unpack that for us.
Yeah, I'll add a third descriptor that I think is pretty appropriate in a lot of environments, and that's fear.
Mm,
It's fear, fear of retribution for making a mistake, fear of being kind of called out for taking initiative. Instead, the opposite of that is mediocrity again, and it tells the team do as you're told, right? Even if you recognize an
mm,
opportunity for us to be better, there's this fear that is typically kind of this cloak that surrounds all of us. Like, okay, if I step out of my lane, I'm going to end up with my wrist slapped or
right.
worse. So, the apathy was the outcome. The fear and uncertainty were the inputs. And I've been, by the way, even when I had very senior roles, I worked for a pharmaceutical firm where I led 15,000 people. I had an OpEx of about $2 billion. And even as senior as I was, I found myself fearful. I found myself apathetic. I found myself just not feeling whole. So it's not reserved for just frontline people. At all levels, these feelings can creep in.
Mhm.
It's what we do with it. It's how we react to it is what determines our leadership legacy. So for me, I needed, and I continue to really make this a point of focus is whether it's with my clients or when I'm on stage for a keynote is to be very open about the role vulnerability plays in being an
Mm,
impactful leader, the role or the impact that can come from setting your ego aside, which are two things that were completely foreign to me for the first 20-ish years of my career. You know, um, I'm going to point something out that I refer to pretty regularly because we're talking about COVID for a moment. Is so MIT and Sloan, the business school Sloan at MIT, partnered with Glassdoor to create something called the Culture 500. And within the Culture 500, there's a series of kind of criteria and questions and just tons of data. But the thing that I want to bring your attention to is they ask a question, or not ask a question. They tried to quantify using 30 million profiles from Glassdoor to try to understand why it is, on average, the top handful of reasons why people leave their organization, the team that they're on, right? And I won't get the order of them right, but it's unmanaged or unmanageable workload, unfair expectations, lack of manager support, and the first is toxic culture. Toxic culture. By the way, pay was like 16 on the list. And when we realize toxic culture and those unmanageable workload, unfair expectations, when we realize who is responsible for essentially creating the environment where people feel this way, it's you, it's me, it's really all of us, but typically it's the person or group of people that are kind of in charge, those with some type of authority. They're the ones responsible for it. And until that group recognizes it, it's nothing's going to change. So I ultimately tell folks, if you feel like you're in an environment where your talents are not being recognized, you're not leaving the office or your virtual location with fulfillment, you don't feel as if you're having an impact, back to that self-reflection. Can I do this for the next 20, 30, 40 years? And if you can, if you made that decision, this is who you are, and you just want to keep your head down and collect a paycheck, I got nothing but love for you. I get it. I completely understand it. But if you want to find more fulfillment and have a greater impact, that's when the self-reflection must happen, because that toxic culture is going to be what it is until someone like you, steps in front of it and says, enough. There is a better way. And here's how we're going to find that better way. It's going to create a lot more work for all of us. There's no doubt about that. It does create more work because, again, if we're a boss, we can check boxes all day long. Anybody can do that. But if we're going to invest our time, energy, and our care into those around us, that takes a hell of a lot more work, a lot more hours, and a daily commitment to do so.
Yeah. Well, and it's in the moment. I had a podcast with someone recently, and they were talking about doing stay interviews versus exit interviews. And I had this huge light bulb. I'm like, if we as leaders just connected personally, as you talked about, authentically, you know, being vulnerable, caring about our people, and creating a culture where the numbers will come.
Yeah.
I'm first of all just going to build a team of people who want to be here. They are having big impact to the bottom line. They feel cared. Like, all the things that you're saying, these are not like big things that people don't know. And yet I look at the statistics, Kyle, and I go crazy because we've never had more information. And yet, the cost of poor leadership, I think the last poll that I looked at was like $550 billion annually that bad leadership is costing us. And I think Gallup, in their most recent poll said 10% of the population are quote unquote natural leaders. I don't know that I believe there's natural leaders. I'd love to dig into that with you a little bit.
I would too.
20% of our leaders are possessing the traits that they can actually develop another person. And 80% of our people are saying, my culture's bad.
It
I'm
ain't
not
working.
being led. It's not
Yeah.
working.
Yeah.
So A, we have more information than we've ever had. B, we know that it's costing us money. C, I don't think we're born leaders. I think we can develop it every single day. So why are we not getting better? And unpack this whole natural born leader for us. Two questions.
Well, you intimated exactly how I would respond. Is leaders are not born. Certainly, some folks are more charismatic than others. Others have maybe a stronger knack for connecting with others.
Yeah.
But I think leadership is so much like just about anything else in our life. Repetition. Repetition is required to get better at something. But that repetition, again, only comes after you've made the commitment to get better at something. It's like, so let's just say I made the decision that I want to lose some weight, right? I'm going to go to
Yep.
the gym tomorrow. I'll stand on that treadmill for an hour. I'll come home. I won't look different at all. I won't. I'll go the next day, do the same thing, not losing any weight. But when I stack that up in the repetition and I do this over and over again, you start to see change. It's inevitable. You start to see change. But it's that continuous reinforcement loop that we've got to find. And that only comes after practicing and reps and reps and reps and recognizing that I don't have it all figured out. And that's that vulnerability component that I mentioned earlier. It's like, you've got to let go of the need to be the right person, the smartest person, the one with all the answers. Because when we're in a team environment, by the way, it's no different than any relationship. When I step back, I leave space for members of the team to step forward. And that's what everybody wants. Very few people come to work to be a saboteur. And I think very few people come to work to not do a good job. It happens.
Agree.
It is the exception, but I don't think it's the rule.
I agree.
So when we recognize that others want the same things that we want, to me, it boils down to something that's as simple as ABC. And this is kind of a Kyleism. We all want to add value. All of us. That's the A. We all want to add value. We all want to be valued. I want those around me, my boss, my peers. I want folks to recognize the work that I'm doing and the impact that it's having. I want to be valued for that, whether that's a form of compensation, recognition, any number of ways, but it can't go unnoticed or unrecognized.
That's right.
And the C is the hardest of them all. And I think this is where so many organizations fall short, is connecting the value that one delivers to the ultimate consumer of that value, whether it's a product or service that we manufacture, and whatever it is. If you really want people to feel fulfilled and recognize the impact they're having, they need to see it, hear it, feel it from those that actually pay our salaries. They buy the product or service that we have. It's hard to do, especially in a service environment. And that's kind of where I was raised, is in back office operations, leading really big call centers or back office functions, and connecting value for those that don't necessarily always interface with the frontline user or the purchaser of our product. Connecting those dots is really hard to do. But boy, does the light bulb shine brightly when someone can see that's the impact I had. The work that I did
That's right.
put a smile on this consumer's face, or it gives them a different perception of what it is that we do. They think differently of us because of what I did. So I think if we remember the ABCs, as simple as it sounds, it's not easy. We recognize folks for their humanity, their contribution, and we recognize them for the value that we're adding. And by the way, it feels so good to do that as well.
Yeah.
It feels so good to shine a light on somebody else, because they're not going to work less hard after that. They're going to be more committed and more engaged once they realize that connection that they've made with the product or service that we sell and those that consume it.
That's right. So Kyle, you spend your entire life transforming leaders. So I'm curious if you have an example of the most transformative leadership experience out there that you've been a part of, partnering with these leaders. Do you have an example of a leader that you've transformed or a team that you've transformed?
Yeah, when you ask for a specific leader, the list is long. I mentioned this earlier, and I don't think I drove the point home. Is those one-on-ones that I still have from folks that I've worked with over the last decade is I can count them on more than one hand. If I counted the number of people that I have similar relationships from the first 20 years, it's way less than one hand. It's probably one, maybe two people. But there's an individual, a woman that I've just grown to have. I always have, but I think as of the last few years, my level of respect for her has exponentially increased. Her name is Julia, and she knows I tell this story, so I feel comfortable sharing it. The morning that I introduced the 10 principles to that team back in 2017, I would say half the room was pretty optimistic. They were excited about the road ahead. I would guess maybe a quarter of the room was optimistic but skeptical. And then there was the last quarter who was essentially obstinate. They just thought I was kind of full of it. They thought it was just kind of a devil in what's that, wolf in sheep's clothing type thing. And one in that group was now a friend. She's now a friend of mine, named Julia. She was difficult, man. She was difficult at almost every opportunity. I think in hindsight now, she was challenging me, and she wanted to see if I was all talk or was I actually going to walk the walk. My favorite example is this is early in our relationship. I asked for an Excel workbook because I was new to the team. I wanted to do some analysis and just kind of learn more about what it is that we did. She sent me a screenshot. you can't check references and you can't see the math behind the scenes with a screenshot of an Excel document. I said, "Hey, Julia, man, can you send me the whole workbook, please?" She then sent me a tab within the workbook, not the
Oh,
whole
she
thing. So
did
again, couldn't
not.
see the references. And don't you know, Wendy, I was ready to bang the fist on the desk, ready to raise my voice. I was hot behind, right? I didn't show that. Fast forward now, this is again 7 years later. She's one of those folks that I still have regular contact with. We have one-on-one schedule for next week. We're going to reconnect.
Mm.
After I left that organization, she went on to assume my role. She ultimately ended up leading 13, 14,000 people. When we first met, she was leading maybe 100, maybe less, around there somewhere. And watching her transformation, not only when we worked together, but since then, she is front and center at all things in her organization, taking on more than she probably ever thought she would be asked to take on.
Mhm.
And her approach was really starch and kind of regimented and formulaic for the first probably dozen plus years of her career. And the last 7 or 8 have been quite different. She is so invested in the people more so than ever before, less invested in the numbers, recognizing the people that deliver the numbers are where the focus should be. And she's blossomed into quite the executive, and I'm just so proud of her. I'm proud of our relationship. And she is absolutely the platinum example that comes to mind when you ask that
Mhm.
question.
And how did you get there? I mean, I know our
Yeah.
listeners are listening to this, and where do I start? And, there's so much to unpack here. Where do they start?
Well, it starts with that decision. It starts with the decision and making a choice to find the better way. And I'm not arrogant enough to sit in front of you and say my way is the only way. These principles, the 10 wees, they don't. If you never give the 10 wees a try, I'm good with that. But what I would implore you to do is establish your principles. What are the things? What are your fundamental truths? Your foundational beliefs, and share them. Be wide open with them. Be so overt and conspicuous with those around you because you want them to understand from where you're coming. You want them to understand how you view things. And by the way, if you have someone on the team that's not going to subscribe to a set of principles where the first one is we do the right thing, you may not want them on the team anyway,
Hmm.
right? I mean, that's just you have to make some tough decisions in that
That's
process
right.
as well.
Hmm.
But consistency is your friend. Momentum is your friend. And what I found, not only the first time I introduced the principles, but without fail, every single time since then. I just left an engagement, by the way, with a botanical gardens in Florida. They are on Time Magazine's top 100 places to visit in the world. It is a beautiful campus that they have. Their senior leader, their COO, called me in to sit with their leadership team, and we went through. We have accompanying workbook that is kind of an adjunct to my book, Begin with We, where we go much deeper into each one of the principles. Watching that team transform collectively and their embrace of these foundational truths, I have chills telling the story. It's so profound to me, and how they interact and treat each other, and the expectations they have for one another. The bar's been raised across the board for all those things because they're aligned around these principles. So the first step is to have that self-reflection. Go deep. Is this something? Do I have what it takes to be the leader I've never had? Do I have what it takes to lead in a way that I've never led? And if the answer to that is no, because you don't want to upset the apple cart, you don't want to risk employment, you don't want to kind of challenge the status quo. I get it. I understand. But if you want to find fulfillment and if you want to really connect with those around you, and if you want to have an impact that far outlasts your tenure in that position, that choice will require a lot of extra work. It's very simple work, but it's
Mhm.
not easy work, and it
Yeah.
must be done over and over. It's a repetition thing again. It's over and over and over again, but it starts with that first bit of self-reflection and then making the choice. And that choice has to be made over and over and over again.
Yeah. And it probably doesn't get any easier. Doesn't get complex to your point. It's simple. It's like a rubber band. You keep stretching and you keep stretching and you keep stretching.
That's
And at
right.
some
That's
point,
right.
you're going
I
to
will
want to go
tell,
back to
Wendy,
what
I
you've
will
always
tell you,
done.
I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
No.
I will tell you, it does become easier So I get this question a lot is, okay, Kyle, so we're in, we embrace the principles. We've
Yeah.
all read the book. We know that this is a path for us. How long until we have this culture of excellence? And my answer is, I don't know, because I can't measure or quantify your commitment to this. I can't quantify the first time you
Yeah.
have an ornery employee approach you with things that really want to you
Right.
want to be set off. You want to like explode back. I
Hmm.
can't assess how you're going to react to that.
Hmm.
But what I can say is momentum is your friend in the consistency of not just talking about it, but living the principles, living them every single interaction. You will fail, you will stumble. I still do. Where I'm going with all this is, though, it does become easier because the predictability of one another, of how we behave, how we face those adverse situations or that adversity, it becomes much more predictable. I've reached a point in two different organizations where we could finish each other's sentences when we're
Yeah.
facing adversity because we would lean back into them. We would lean back and say,
Mm.
well, okay, we have this tough decision in front of us. Let's get all these bad decisions or the not right thing decisions out of the way. Why? Because we, number one, is we do the right thing always. That's one word, second sentence never is far behind the first sentence, and that's always. So we start to finish each other's sentences and that, okay, yeah, this is a problem. We have a list of options in front of us. Let's kick these options out because we know they're not the right thing. And now we're focused on a smaller group of decisions, and we can almost finish each other's sentences on how we get there.
Mm. It sounds
Hard to
so
believe.
good, Kyle. I'd follow you anywhere. I want a one-on-one with you.
You're too sweet.
So,
Thank you.
for our leaders who are listening to this, or up and coming leaders, or people who are now realizing, I think I'm managing. I'm not sure that I'm actually leading, or I have some fear on my team, or yeah, I think maybe I'm being a little bit apathetic and uncertainty, and maybe I've never defined my principles. So all the things that you're talking about, when you look at your legacy for all of those people that are thinking those things, what do you want your legacy to be, and
Mm.
how will you know when you've actually had the impact that you're seeking?
It's we often reserve those two words, leadership and legacy. First of all, we rarely use them together. And we
Mm,
reserve the word legacy for people in the spotlight, a Tom Brady or someone quote unquote famous. Our leadership legacy starts the moment you choose to create a leadership legacy. And it's not always these grand strategic things that determine that legacy. When I'm walking through the hallway and I see a colleague approaching, do I have my phone out, my face buried
mm.
in it, or do I say, good morning? How are you? Good to see you. Did you have a good
With eye
weekend?
contact. Yeah.
Yeah, you just say hello. But when I'm
Mm,
buried in my phone, I've sent the message that what I have going on in here is more important than you.
yeah.
And you are now more likely to do the exact same thing to the next person walking your way. So now
Yeah.
again, we have this group of people with the same badge, but a team? No, no, no. We're not a team. And I think trust is the most important element of this part of the conversation because if you want people to follow you, you want to create followership, they must trust you. No one's going to follow someone that they don't trust. But how do you gain trust, right? It's not something, everybody approaches trust differently. Some give it right out of the gate, others need to have it earned. I boil it down to something really kind of discreet. Authenticity plus relatability equals
Mm,
trust. If I'm authentic in who I am, like, you said a moment ago, what if I'm that person that's facing, I'm starting to feel the apathy. I feel disconnected, or I feel like I'm part of an environment that's not going to allow me to drive change that I think is required, not only for our team, but for our well-being as humans. Making the decision to hammer, not hammer, that's probably the wrong word because that creates this kind of vision in my head that it's a top-down initiative, and none of this is an initiative. It's who we are. It's a way of
that's right.
life.
It's
It's a
what
way
we
of
do.
being.
That's right.
Making the decision to travel down that path, to be vulnerable, to set aside the ego, to try to be relatable. And by relatable, it could be as simple as a member of the team call and say, I'm going to be a little bit late today because my child was sick this morning. Instead of saying, well, you're supposed to be here at 8 and we'll talk about this when you get here, you say, like, I get it. I understand. And we'll make up the time some other way. I
Mm,
trust you. You trust me. I'm being authentic. I'm being relatable in that I understand the situation. We've all had that boss that when you have something come up or some issue that is, baggage that you have a choice to bring to work or not, the boss that acts like they've never been in those shoes before, they've never
right.
experienced this type of adversity in their own life. I can't relate to that because you're a robot.
That's right.
And by the way, on the relatability thing for just a moment, we have two different vocabularies, right, Wendy?
I don't
We
think
have
I
our
knew
work
that.
vocabulary. Well,
Oh, yeah.
I'll ask you this. When's the last time you went home to your significant other and said, "How'd you do on your deliverables today?" We never do that. You circle back to the parking lot to answer questions because we didn't want to answer them now. There's BS bingo that happens
Right.
inside the corporate work. Not
BS
relatable,
bingo.
not relatable, right? Because nobody speaks that way outside of the workplace.
It's
They
so
don't.
true.
Now, I don't mean to imply that, we're swearing and we got to have some level of decorum. Of course we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
But the more robotic I am and the less relatable I am, trust is out the window. When
Mm,
the team senses I am authentic in my opinions, you may not like what I have to say, but you'll know there's no ulterior motive behind it. You will see my disappointment. You will see my excitement. You will see
yep.
my frustration, the
Yep.
whole spectrum of emotions. I'm not going to hide from you because I don't want you
Mm,
to hide them from me. And when you sense that authenticity and relatability, it's impossible to not engender trust. It's impossible. So
yeah.
for me, I think trust is one of the more important elements of being an impactful leader and creating followership. But no one's going to trust you with this BS bingo vocabulary. You're not relatable because you're
Yeah.
more focused on outcomes instead of the person that's going to deliver the outcomes.
Hmm.
I just feel like we got to keep those things front of mind every single day because, again, a boss can check the boxes, a manager can check the boxes, a leader is going to behave in a very different way.
Hmm. So good. We could do this forever, Kyle. I so appreciate your knowledge. I appreciate your
So kind.
authenticity that you don't just talk about all the things that need to be done. You actually talk about your failures and how a lot of these things that you learn not from doing it right. You learn from failing forward, which I appreciate how honest and open that you are. And I think that allows for us to be honest and open to go, wow, I have some opportunities to be a better leader. So I just appreciate that you bring that forward.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to share the story. And, I'll say this, Wendy, and maybe it's kind of redundant, but there is a better way. And if you're
Mhm.
curious about that better way, it has to start with you. If you're
Yeah.
expecting others around you to change or create an environment that you feel more whole, an environment that allows you to find the impact that you're chasing, you're going to be waiting a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of what we've talked about is reserved for those that are in a position of quote unquote authority, those with a
Mhm.
team or direct reports. You are a leader by how you behave. You're a leader by the examples you set, whether you
That's right.
have a team of one, a team of 10,000. But none of it's going to happen for you. It has to be a conspicuous and conscious choice that you make over and over and over again. And then uh, give yourself some grace when you err, because I'm by no means perfect at living my own principles.
Yeah.
But when I have people that are authentic around me and they are interested in us achieving optimal outcomes and finding excellence, they're going to tell me when I've erred.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be okay with that because I know it's not personal and they're
That's
coming
right.
with this feedback or this even criticism, the challenge from a place of wanting to be excellent. And
Yeah.
we need each other to be excellent. It's not a one man show.
That's right. And when we're all accountable to each other to excellence,
That's
that's one
beautiful.
of my least favorite things that I hear people say is you got to hold me accountable or I'm going to hold you. How the hell are you going to hold somebody accountable? Like it's impossible versus I'm going to be accountable and we're going to create a culture of accountability. I'm going to accept accountability. And I think that goes with your challenge of, we're going to challenge each other and we're going to receive that challenge, understanding that the heart is pure and we just have a goal towards excellence. I mean,
That's
you
it.
said it earlier. I don't think the majority of the world wakes up in the morning going, wow, I really want to suck today. So,
No,
if I have
no.
somebody that's sucking,
Yeah.
it's probably because it's something that I could help them with, or I didn't give them the skills, ability, whatever it is.
Hmm.
And so I love your we principle so much. And so
Thank you.
for all of our listeners who are listening to this and this is resonating, and I know it's going to resonate with so many, go buy Kyle's book, Begin with We. And I think you have a podcast too, don't you, Kyle?
I don't. No,
Well, okay, you
I
need to
don't.
start that immediately.
Yeah, I actually, ironically, that you bring that up. I am shooting my first podcast as a host in 2 weeks from today, actually. But I'm the kind of
Awesome.
guy, man, and I sense this in you as well. I don't, I don't half-ass stuff. So if
Exactly.
right, so if I'm going to start it, it's not one and done. It's the first of many. I won't
Yeah.
stop. So
Yeah.
I got to get to a point where I'm ready to say, okay, this is something that we're doing, Kyle. And it's just you could probably wax about it poetically much longer than I. It's a grind.
It
Hosting a
is a grind.
show is a grind, and
Yeah.
until I kind of find that lane for myself,
Yeah.
I'm really content joining others on shows like yours.
Yeah, well, it's certainly been a pleasure. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who want to get in contact with you. So I'll make sure that your information is in the show notes. What's the best way to reach you, Kyle?
I'm on all social media platforms with the same handle. It's at Kyle McDowell Inc. My website is kylemcdowellinc.com. And I'm grateful that you've given me a chance to share those platforms, but I don't share them out of vanity reasons. Like I could care less about the classic vanity metrics, followers, and things like that.
Yeah.
Use it as a communication conduit. Message me, reach out, whatever. If I've said something today that you vehemently disagree with, I'd love to hear from you. If
Hmm.
I've said something today that sparked curiosity that you think, well, maybe this might be the right path for me, I'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to help. And I mean that with such sincerity. I now view this path that I'm on, it's my obligation. It is now my purpose. We talked about it before you hit record about what do you want to do when you grow up? I found that. And I believe the years that I spent in a place that left me less than fulfilled, feeling like a cog in a machine, and now having the exact opposite paradigm towards my work. I think with that comes the requirement and obligation to help others find that same path, and that's what I've dedicated my existence to.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making us better one person at a time, one company at a time, one podcast at a time. So thank you for writing a book. We'll make sure all your information is in the show notes and any last words for our listeners.
I'm pausing because it is such an important question, right? It's the last thing people will hear from me or from you and I, at least together during this episode. And as trite as it might sound, and as many eye rolls as it might elicit, you don't have to hate your job. You
Mhm.
don't. And it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter. If we focus less about the X's and O's of the role and more about
Yeah.
those around us and our obligation as humans to help one another, the job becomes secondary. The X's and O's become secondary because you're more focused on lifting others up, being lifted up when you need it, and those types of things. So you don't have to hate your job is what I would part with.
Yeah. So good. All right, Kyle. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to our next podcast because we got to do this again. We could
I
do
would
this for
love that.
hours. So
Yeah, I would love
appreciate it.
that.
All
You
right.
bet.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed with Wendy Swanson. Make sure to subscribe and follow to be notified when the newest episodes of the podcast go live. Please take a moment to rate and review us. It helps others discover Unleashed and join our movement of forward-thinking leaders. You can find contact information and important links in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode, and remember, keep leading with authenticity, embrace change, and choose to live life unleashed.